to the January 5th edition of Global Dialogue, the International Affairs Speakers Program of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. I'm Patrick Ryan, President of the Council. This evening, we welcome Malcolm Nance to our program. Malcolm was with us at Belmont University for a podcast, I guess about 13 months ago. It was, Malcolm, you were in Nashville for Politicon. So welcome back virtually to Nashville.
Well, there you go. I've learned to use Zoom, so I'm glad to be here. And I'm exceptionally glad to be here at this time after the tragedy that struck your city, and hopefully I can give some enlightenment.
Well, we appreciate your expertise in helping us put together some of the pieces of what's happening here, not just in Nashville, but around the country, the domestic terror threat and the threat abroad. And we'll also get into your specialty, the cyber effects of what the Russians have been doing over recent years, and what the office of the DNI today said was probably a Russian attack, this latest large attack against the United States. But first, let me give a little background for the folks, Malcolm, on your extraordinary journey from enlisting in the U.S. Navy, rising to the ranks of senior chief petty officer. You were a cryptologic technician, which is Navy speak for a guy who listens to communications and provides intelligence on what the bad guys are doing. You were an Arabic-speaking intelligence specialist. You're qualified in submarines. You and I share that honor. So tip of the hat to you for that. And you've also been a combat veteran dealing in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. You're a historian and author, 35 years participating in field and combat intelligence activity, including both covert and clandestine anti and counterterrorism support to national intelligence agencies. And for the folks who want to Google Malcolm Nance and look at the images, you'll see some pictures of him out in the desert with all sorts of weaponry that maybe we'll get into some of your stories there, but you've had quite the colorful career in support of U.S. national interests around the world, particularly in the Middle East, and your work with counterintelligence. Malcolm has written a number of books. When you go to Amazon, you'll find The Plot to Betray America, which is now out in paperback. And preceding that were The Plot to Destroy America, The Plot to Hack America. And talking about terrorism, this is the guy who wrote the book. Literally, he wrote the Terrorist Recognition Handbook. So we're going to get into some of those things. Currently, Malcolm is Executive Director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project on Strategy, Tactics, and Radical Ideologies, based in Hudson, New York. So today we're going to be talking about the Nashville Christmas bombing and try to pull apart some of the pieces of that and make some sense of it. Domestic terror threats, international terror threats, and comments on, let's call it the big hack. Malcolm, I should have mentioned you're also a regular commentator on cable news, and that's where I recently caught up with your comments on the Nashville bombing on MSNBC. Why don't you give us your impressions of what we know about the bombing, the bomber, the motivation, and so forth?
Yeah, well, this is a conundrum, and I, as I said, I hope to bring enlightenment to your forum, but this is one of those incidents where we sort of lack light to give some definitive answers. But the things that we all know, all of you who are from that city have lived, and that is that there was a seemingly terrorist suicide car bomber, who delivered a very large explosive weapon of mass destruction down into the middle of your city. It has a few, how can I put it? It has a few characteristics which are very unique in terrorism. And as you know, I'm the counterterrorism and intelligence analyst for MSNBC. So I was immediately reporting along with our Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, bomb guy, Jim Kavanaugh, on what this was, what the motivation of this was. I have an experience with this. I've survived several car bombs. I've been within the blast radius of 3 car bombs, enough to where shrapnel and debris blew through us, and have been in the proximity of easily a dozen more in Iraq, Iraq and Lebanon. So to me, I mean, I understood what the weapon system was that was being deployed. And again, this one has some unique characteristics to it. First, the target itself, which was the city of Nashville. We have a saying in counterterrorism is the tactics chosen are target dependent, or as we like to say, the target is the tactics, right? So depending on what you're going to hit will determine how you're going to hit it, what kind of weapon system you're going to use, how big a weapon system you require for that. Clearly, this was not something that the suicide bomber, which it turns out in the end it was, even though it was an American, the person did choose to sit with the weapon system and blow himself up, which made him a human-guided weapon. And that's what we call suicide bombers. He was a kamikaze. He went with the weapon system to ensure that the weapon itself would detonate. This individual, Anthony Warner from Nashville, one of your neighbors, apparently had been working on this weapon as far back as 13 to 16 months when the police received a report from one of his relationships that he was building a weapon of some type or bombs inside his RV, which is unique because we don't normally get an RV itself, the weapon delivery system, right? The transport for the bomb. You usually don't get that as the principal place of construction, or what we call the bomb factory, right? My first thought was the guy used his basement for all the electronic components. The bomb factory was in his house, and that the vehicle itself was the payload, right? Was the system which would transport the bomb and blow up. Well, based on her testimony, he was building it inside the weapon itself, which indicates one of two things. One, it's a really big weapon and it had to be built in situ so that all of the explosive train components were there and for him would work properly. Although I'm sure some workbenching of the electronics and other things which required a flat table were probably being done inside the house. The morning of the delivery of this device also gave us some very, very unique aspects to the attack that I'm sure you're all familiar with. But I'm going to give you my perspective on why they were different. The interesting thing is a lot of people who discuss these things, FBI agents, even a lot of bomb guys who were out there on television, they're well versed in explosive devices, and certainly explosive devices here in the United States. But they can't really give you that comparative analysis of the bombs, say, Sri Lanka versus Baghdad versus northern Syria. And, unfortunately, I can give you that perspective. And, this also required a deep study in the history of bombing in the United States. And this is where Jim Kavanaugh, who's our BATF explosives guy, came in very handy. The weapon that he used was a suicide vehicle bomb, right? It was a suicide vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, or what we call an SVBIED, right? SVBIED. And in this particular instance, it came with characteristics that were just not seen in the United States for decades. The first was that he drove the weapon there at about 1:30 in the morning. Then he sat in the vehicle, quite possibly making sure his explosive train was solid or getting, communing with whoever his God was. But he sat inside that vehicle, and sometime around 5:30 in the morning, he instituted a recording, which was apparently either tied to the bomb train, to the explosive train, or was detonated by hand by him on a countdown clock. And this led to a loudspeaker which played music. Now we understand it's, the British song Downtown, and a warning, a computerized voice warning, counting down from to the explosion, from like 30 minutes down to the explosion. Also, there were shots fired. We don't know whether those came from a real firearm or whether it came from like a pneumatic weapon, or, we've seen those air guns made to sound like weapons, or whether it was actually just a recording played very loud from that vehicle itself. But that brought the police there. Once the police came, they saw that something strange was going on and heeded the warning and evacuated as many people as possible from the area, which immediately indicated to me that the bomber was American, because that is not how international jihadist terrorists operate. Yeah, and some people say, well, it was Nashville, Tennessee. Terrorists don't care about the location of the attack. Generally, when they're using a real weapon of an explosive weapon of mass destruction, which is what we call these huge car bombs, they care about killing individuals and making a point and having the most spectacular event happen at the time that they will get the most eyes. So
Malcolm, let me mention
Sure.
to you that despite the pandemic, Nashville, Tennessee, Lower Broadway, on a Saturday night, or Friday night, any night anymore, is just packed with people.
I believe it. Yeah,
so
you live right
it's
there.
it's a target-rich environment, and he definitely could have exposed many more people to the explosion.
Sure. And how many hens parties are down there in one evening? So, the place is normally packed. So
Yeah.
he chose a very specific time that would, in my estimation, have enough police on scene at the watch change at like around 6 o'clock in the morning, fire department the same, where people would be a little more lucid at waking up at 5 in the morning, and then detonated his payload at around 6:30 in the morning. And if you haven't seen the videos, there's really good body camera footage from one of the officers who was carrying out the evacuations there. And people, they just really didn't understand what was happening. But that's because the bomber gave these warnings, which again, immediately I thought, well, this is an American bomber. This person wants to do damage. He doesn't want to kill a lot of people, but he still knew people could and would die from his explosive device based on the size of the payload. He also gave himself such a short window that no one would be shooting, no one would be coming on board and trying to disarm this device. Also from reports, I've seen the body camera footage and heard the testimony of the policeman. They didn't see anyone in the driver's window, which means he was back in the payload. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Deadpool 2, the comic, sort of joking, acerbic superhero. He actually lays on like 100 pounds of C4 and TNT as a form of suicide. Since he's an immortal character, he can't die. And, immediately that thought came to mind, that this bomber not just was in the vehicle, this bomber was with the device, which means he wanted 100% to make sure he wasn't blown clear of this device, that he was personally vaporized with it. And that is absolutely for sure, because I've been around a lot of bombings. And I can tell you, I had a friend who was actually at one of the London bombings on 7/7, back in 2007, 2008. And he had a suicide bomber on a double-decker bus. And while talking to me, he ran outside and I said, I need you to look at the top of the bus. Is the top of the bus peeled back? He goes, yes. I said, do you see a torso with no arms and no head? And he goes, yes. And I said, are the legs still there? He goes, yes. I said, it is a man with a chest device that went off and blew upwards and kept his torso and legs there, not his arms. There are ways to determine what explosive force you're dealing with in a suicide bombing of this measure. This guy, it took days to determine there was a human there.
Yeah. Malcolm, have you heard any reports of the size of the explosive, or if not in absolute terms, but in relative terms to other bombings that we may have come to understand?
No, and they're keeping a really tight lid on the type of explosive payload that he used. There's all sorts of rumors. You know, my first thought was ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, which is the most common explosive type that there is out there. Well, that's not true. The most common explosive type in the United States is black powder and propane. Those are really small, low order explosives. A high order explosive like, C4 or some sort of TNT or industrial, you guys live in Tennessee. I went to bodyguard school out in Western Tennessee and, Memphis. And I can tell you right now, everyone's got a license to blow up stumps on their land. So there's a lot of explosives out there which have completely legal purposes all the time, So this particular character, we don't know yet whether he was using a very high order explosive. And you can't really tell other than the fact that it did create a small crater. But most importantly, this guy knew where he was putting the device. He parked it across, let's assume the rumor that he was out to attack the AT&T building and that he attacked, sorry, I've got the Georgia election above my head, so it's jumped into my eyesight for a second.
A lot of competition tonight. The hockey championship is on too.
Assuming that he used something like this, he parked that vehicle across the street, and if he really wanted to damage the AT&T building, he was using the shorter buildings to tamp his explosive and thrust all the explosive power into the AT&T building, as opposed to people who were saying, well, why didn't he just park next to it? Well, then the explosive force could have just hit the wall and rode up the side of the building and not damaged it as much as he wanted to. So this guy did know what he was doing. And he also knew that these buildings he was parked next to would all collapse, which they pretty much have done on the facade level. And, one of them, the one that was closest, both floors have collapsed inwards.
Yeah. So Malcolm, we're going to work in some questions here as we go along. Angela Weck from the Peoria World Affairs Council, who's joined us, she asked, what would be the reason for law enforcement to keep the details so close to their chest?
Well, the principal reason is because you don't know if there are co-conspirators to this attack. When Timothy McVeigh carried out the Oklahoma City bombing, it took a little while, but they figured out that there were three other co-conspirators in there, Terry Nichols, and then two other people who actually helped him test his bomb and his ammonium nitrate and fuel oil mix. So that would be the principal reason why you would want to keep a close hold on that and the explosive payload itself. Although I'm quite surprised that hasn't gotten out. But there are rumors everywhere. Don't believe anything that's not being given by the FBI or local officials at this point.
Let's talk a little bit about motivation. That seems to be a nebulous situation in this investigation as well, at least as far as what's been let out to the public.
Right. Yeah. The motivation of this particular individual is still an unknown. Although the reason that the FBI was going around and interviewing people early on about the 5G conspiracy was because of the nature of what they believed was the target. The vehicle was parked across from the AT&T building. It had emergency communications for 3 different states. Also, it had cellular towers on top. So if you're not familiar with the 5G conspiracy theory, it's one of the many outlying conspiracy theories that has now folded itself into the QAnon conspiracy theory. So starting right off the top, QAnon is a conspiracy theory that Donald Trump is a national savior that is going and leading a secret underground war, assisted by Robert Mueller, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who my last check was dead, and was a military intelligence officer with a Q security clearance, which is interesting because that's Department of Energy. So not regular top secret clearance, not special access program clearance. No, a weird, obscure, Department of Energy top GenSir top secret, which for those of us who have held higher than top secret, that ain't particularly high. But he's convinced the world that there is this secret war going on led by Donald Trump to stop a global cabal of Jews, elites from Hollywood, the news media, all Democratic leadership from kidnapping and using trafficking and using the blood of children. If this sounds familiar, it is literally the blood libel conspiracy theory that the Nazis hearkened from the protocols of the elders of Zion, that the Jews are running the world and all the international banking networks and are using the blood of young Christian children in secret rituals. This is what QAnon has developed into. 5G conspiracy theory came about when coronavirus started. And as an offshoot of QAnon and anti-vaccine conspiracies, they believe, wait for it, that 5G cellular technology, which is just 5th generation cellular streaming of data, actually carries on its ultra high frequency radio waves the coronavirus. Now, it's an interesting mix that, coronavirus and suddenly high frequency radio signals, which are all around us, right? Somehow the biology of moving coronavirus on a radio wave is something that's escaped all science except the geniuses who believe in the 5G conspiracy theory.
Now is there any evidence that that Warner was among those?
The only evidence that's out there now is because the FBI very quickly started asking all of his immediate associates if they had heard him discuss the 5G conspiracy theory. They obviously derived that from the target. And as I said, right, the target indicate the tactics are determined by the target, right?
Right.
Giant car bomb, guy sitting on top of it playing like he's in Deadpool 2, exploding it in the middle of the, in the early morning across from an AT&T building, knocks out massive quantities of communications. Could only be really, and he kills himself doing it, most likely something associated with the QAnon 5G conspiracy theory. Now, before you say, well, that's uniquely crazy, well, one of the first QAnon attacks in the United States took place a year ago when a man drove an armored vehicle, an old bank truck with a bomb and weapons onto Hoover Dam last year and was going to blow it up, or so he said, unless they exposed the global cabal of people that were kidnapping children and drinking their blood. So this is getting out of control to the point where the FBI is called the QAnon and all the other subordinate conspiracy theory threats the #1 national security threat in the United States, because it's being borne not just by the crazies who believe it, it's being borne by neo-Nazis, right-wing extremists, and extremists of all, of the far right political bent.
Well, let's we've really colored in the nature of the bombing and all. Let's talk a little bit about the classification of this. There's been some criticism that the FBI has not labeled it a terrorism event, and Lynn Grassmeyer, who is a friend of the World Affairs Council, asked the question, and I was going to raise it as well. Why do we need a clear motive, or why can't we just go on the scope of the attack? this, the weapon of mass destruction. Um, uh, Fill that in for us as far as whether this should be a terrorism, called terrorism or not. And some people are saying that if you're white, you're less likely to have an act labeled terrorism, or less quickly, etc. Um, and this is not just a rhetorical question, because there are people in those buildings down there whose insurance may not pay out if it's a terrorism event.
Right. Interestingly enough, we all try to find some dark humor at times like this. Believe me, I've had some very dark humor in the middle of suicide bombings. But it was just the rhetoric that was coming out of the leadership, um, not just in Nashville, but the national leadership, that at at the front of it seemed hell bent on not using the word terrorism, which is fine. I mean, I understand the motivations related to insurance, but in my world, anyone that brings a weapon of an explosive weapon of mass destruction into the middle of a major American city, all right, and blows it up with the intent to destroy national, regional regional infrastructure, and the potential to kill hundreds, no matter what their motivation is, and even if they're off their rocker, right?
Yeah.
That is still an act of terrorism. The purpose of terrorism, by literal definition, is an act of violence an act or a threat of violence, political in nature, in which which intended to influence an audience beyond the immediate victims. Well, the only thing that's missing here is a component of political. If it is 5G conspiracy theory, that is a political act, because that conspiracy theory is harnessed to the extreme ultra-right QAnon conspiracy theory, which, as we all know, thinks Donald Trump is saving the children and tearing down a global international Jewish liberal cabal from kidnapping, murdering, and eating children. So, yeah, that is a political motivation. I think the FBI, out of an abundance of caution, may have been influenced by the argument on insurance first, but every resource in counterterrorism in the FBI is on this attack. It is being handled like a terrorist attack by the FBI. All the national resources, the FBI and BATF's Joint Terrorism Task Forces are all over this bombing, because if it turns out it's
now, I can testify to that. We're at Printer's Alley here, and the debris went down the alley when the bomb went off. We had broken windows in the building, and I walked out later in the day and the next day, and ATF and FBI were crawling all over Second Avenue and Third Avenue and Church Street. The ATF, on the aircraft carriers, they do a pod walk down looking for debris.
Right.
Shoulder to shoulder, that they were ATF up and down the streets, looking down on the ground, picking up evidence. So yeah, this got major attention.
Yeah, they will literally reconstruct that truck. I mean, when airplanes crash and they put it back together on a frame, they're going to reconstruct that truck, if only to keep it in Quantico, right? So that you can learn off of it. And they'll have a computer-generated model showing where every little last minutia of blast material flew from the explosion, which will tell them an enormous amount about the bomb itself, including all the material and debris that's on it. So, I actually joked at one point on television that, I took another journalist to task. I wasn't taking him to task. I was taking the world to task when I said, they said a significant incident has occurred in, the middle of Nashville, and the New York Times had a description of the attack where they said a quiet person, a shattered morning, a city on edge. And Ayman Mohyeldin from MSNBC rewrote that headline. He said, American suicide bomber detonates car bomb in middle of American city. on no
Yeah,
middle of city on Christmas morning.
I saw
That
that tweet.
is the yeah.
Yeah,
That
I
is
saw that tweet go out.
that's accurate. And anything less than that, literally, it's like that joke meme from the TV show Family Guy where they have a cop, holding a card with different colors, right? And at the top, it's white, pink, slightly more red, and it says a significant incident. And then below it, if it's tan, brown, black, it says terrorist bombing, right? It's hard not to embrace that theory on an event like this. But I can understand why, for insurance purposes, the mayor doesn't want that. The state would have to bear all of that. But it was a suicide terrorist car bombing attack in a major American city.
Yeah, and Malcolm, you and I, we've been following terrorism for a long time. I was at CENTCOM as the terrorism branch chief, and we recognize that this is a special standalone. So I can imagine the FBI is waiting until they get a little more assurance as to what they're looking at.
Yeah, I'm certain they will. And I think that you never know. They may carve out an exclusion. They may say, some exception. But It is what it is. You were hit by a terrorist and you were lucky.
Okay. Well, let's talk about domestic terror. We've got a little more time here. We're a half hour in, and we've got a lot of people who came to hear you tonight. And one of the things that we should talk about is the domestic terror threat. And not everybody saw the testimony, but I'll remind people that a couple of months ago, FBI Director Wray, in testimony before Congress, said the greatest threat we face in the homeland is the threat posed by lone actors radicalized online who look to attack soft targets with easily accessible weapons. And there's a raft of background material on the FBI website and the Department of Homeland Security website talking about violent extremism, the homegrown violent extremists, the domestic violent extremists. There's that's your profession, so the distinctions of all these things. But basically, it just sounds like there's a bad thing going on out there.
Well, what's happening is you're seeing a metamorphosis of what we call lone wolves in terms of the dominant ideology that places the United States at risk today. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that would have been the individual self-radicalized jihadist extremists here in the United States. And, Al-Qaeda, its more radical offshoot ISIS, other, jihadist extremist organizations, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, some of the Pakistani ones, were motivating individuals to carry out attacks in the United States or provide material support to their terrorist, brethren around the world. That has shifted with the fall of ISIS in Syria, the Al-Qaeda diaspora moving out through other parts of the world that don't have easy and direct communications to the United States. What's happened, though, is we have seen the rise, a dramatic and terrifying rise of the homegrown right-wing extremist. And for people like us, people of our age, we might recall the mid-1980s when virtually every other week there was a movie coming on, made-for-TV movie coming on about the FBI taking down neo-Nazis or, Klansmen who were going to plan a bombing or an assassination of the vice president. One famous movie where an FBI agent, a female FBI agent, is inserted into a good old boy right-wing network that was going to assassinate the vice president. All of these things were the fodder of these stories, because back then, that's when the real American militia movement started. The quote unquote patriot militia movement started in the United States. And we had real terrorist groups running around the United States, which were relatively low profile. We had the entire the neo-Nazi Christian identity movement, which was headquartered out of Idaho. In your neck of the woods, Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, there was a terrorist group called the Shield, the Sword, and the Covenant of the Lord, the CSA. And they actually were creating a network of militia, white supremacist terrorist groups that only got exposed with the murder of a journalist named Berg out in Colorado, where they shot him with a fully automatic weapon. If they had shot him with a semi-automatic weapon, they likely would have gotten away with it. But using a fully automatic weapon, it was easier to trace. And then they found this entire network of militias operating throughout the United States. It was really significant back then, enough to get on the cover of Newsweek, magazine about American militias.
Yeah, I remember that incident.
Fast forward to the election of Donald Trump. Now, if it sounds like I'm going to get political here, it's because I am. I'm currently writing a new book about it's not even a militia movement anymore. It's an upcoming insurgency, which will involve arms from militias, groups that view themselves as paramilitary, right-wing extremists, and they have a very solid political, social, and economic base of support from the people that think, Donald Trump is what many refer to him as in the right-wing extremist world, the GEOTUS, not the president of the United States, but and I'm not joking, they actually use this, the God Emperor of the United States. And they view the United States, these people do not believe the United States is made up of what is written around the ring of the Capitol under the Statue of Columbia, which are the words e pluribus unum, from many one. They believe that the United States is a nation that is and will and always will be dominated by one tribe, and that is the white male rural tribe. And Donald Trump, in their estimation, is their tribal leader. And so in defense of that, over the last 4 years, we've seen an explosion of militia groups all throughout the United States. Granted, some of this stuff started when the Newtown massacre occurred and everyone thought they were coming to take your guns the next week. I'm a competitive long-range precision rifle shooter. Believe me, I was there when the big ammunition price explosion happened. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened with Barack Obama. But after Donald Trump was elected, it was sort of seen that Donald Trump was going to make things way better. And that now that they had political support in the United States, many right-wing extremists saw the government as an adjunct of their beliefs. And this isn't just militias. Now we have a new category of combatant on the battlefield, not just these guys who are out there pretending that they're, SEAL Team 6 out there. And there are a lot of them. You can just Google militias right now, 2020, and you'll have 20 news reports of journalists that went on patrol with the militias. The BBC did a really famous one out in Michigan. Now we have armed semi-terrorist paramilitaries. And these are groups which are just this close to being underground terrorist groups, but they like their above ground status. And there are two distinct groups in that category. First is the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys is a hardcore, proudly misogynistic, proudly white supremacist, proudly anti-democratic, pro-fascist group that views themselves as the brown shirts. They view themselves as the armed fist of the extremist Trump campaign. That's what they view themselves as. Defenders of the white race. They have got a lot of neo-Nazis in that group now. In fact, people always try to bring up to me, hey, the leader of the Proud Boys is Hispanic. Well, actually, the actual leader of the Proud Boys has been detached from most of the organization when a few months ago, there was sort of a coup where they said, we will not allow anyone of non-white pure blood into the Proud Boys. In fact, they've actually have sort of distanced themselves from the women's branch of the Proud Boys because they think women should be home. I'm not joking. He actually said this in his manifesto, at home in the kitchen making me a sandwich. So even women who support this group have to take a subordinate role to this misogynistic neo-Nazi mindset that they have inside there. Some of the other groups are the Boogaloo Boys. The Boogaloo are a sort of off branch of the militia movement who believe in the philosophy of white extremist chaos. And they see themselves as, these are the guys who use the Pepe the Frog meme of the orange frog, the green frog,
Right.
always armed, and they dress themselves in Hawaiian shirts, where they think they are going to be the foot soldiers and the shock troops with the Proud Boys of a coming white civil war in America. Same philosophy Timothy McVeigh blew up the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, in that the United States, after a defining terrorist attack, all the whites in the country would get together, throw out everything they've ever learned or cared about with the United States, and start mass murdering everyone who was not white. The Boogaloo sees themselves as sort of these anarchist foot soldiers armed with M4 rifles. There are other groups, the 3 percenters, who sort of fall just below that. This was a group that claimed initially, when they asked me to join them about 10 years ago, that they wanted military and former law enforcement to swear they would never support using US military personnel in the United States. That was their initial philosophy. Now their philosophy is they want the president of the United States to use military force to take over power, to arrest all the liberals and carry out what QAnon calls the Great Storm, where they will just cleanse the nation of all us reprobates. That includes everybody on this phone call, on this Zoomcast. So that's the foot soldiers of this organization. This is what the FBI is monitoring. And let me tell you something, it hasn't been easy because the president fired several people whose job it was to monitor far right-wing extremism, in the belief that there's no way that a white American male like Timothy McVeigh would ever carry out an act of terrorism, even though he had carried out the largest act of terrorism on American soil, and attacked a federal building, prior to 9/11. So it is a risk. We don't know how these people are going to act. There's supposed to be a giant demonstration tomorrow, not just in DC, but all over the country. And these people believe they own the government and that they will not give up this government to Joe Biden. So the next, 15 days could be quite dynamic.
Wow. Malcolm, we're getting our money's worth here today, and we've got quite a few questions to get through, and we're almost running the clock out here. Carol is worried now. She probably will have trouble sleeping tonight after hearing this. She's concerned that this all sounds pretty apocalyptic. And what can we do to even counter these movements? Is the government, are law enforcement ready for this threat? And there's also concerns that some of these individuals are infiltrating law enforcement.
Yeah, well, it's not so much that they're infiltrating law enforcement. They don't have to. There's plenty of law enforcement in this country that believe what they believe, that follow these ideologies, that sign on to the 3% movement. There was the famous case of the Miami SWAT officer who was armed and taking pictures with Mike Pence wearing a QAnon patch, which means that he believed that the government is formed of child molesters, drinking the blood of children. So
and we have General Flynn taking the oath with his family.
Yeah, and General Michael Flynn now is the de facto leader of QAnon, because this whole organization swearing this oath of office, oath to the Constitution, is now a QAnon meme, and a way to swear your loyalty, not just to Michael Flynn, who they feel has been mistreated and treated horribly, But now they believe he's the guy. And some people believe he's Q, which is funny because the Q clearance is like the lowest clearance he would have had, right? At Defense Intelligence Agency. But look, we're talking about people who are mentally dysfunctional. I just had a call from Germany the other day. A friend of mine went to Strasbourg, met a woman in one of her spiritual reading groups, her Bible study group, was spouting QAnon conspiracy theory and was sending her things about Sidney Powell showing the election was rigged. This is a French woman speaking to a German woman on a Christian religious forum, bringing QAnon conspiracy into it. It is moving fast because you can throw anything into that, whether it's the belief that lizard people actually run the United States. There's a very entertaining CSI Las Vegas about that, if you would like to get more detail about that. But there are people who have brought in anti-vaxxing into this. Everything is now part of the conspiracy that the Jews and the liberals and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and everyone who's on this podcast, because you're part of the World Affairs Council. And that means you are a globalist because you believe we should have good relations with the rest of the world. Q has something to say about that too. So it's very disturbing because it's disturbing. And what can we do about it? Well, right now, this isn't 1860, okay? West Point is not splitting with everyone abandoning it and joining a foreign army, all right? What we have here is a mental illness, a sort of a cult illness that is sweeping across the United States. And, you know, shy of a unifying national event from a foreign threat, right? Like a much larger than 9/11 size attack occurring, or an actual biological weapon being released that is far more virulent and instantaneously killing, like a nerve agent or a biological agent being released in the United States by a terrorist group that comes on video and laughs. We have a problem that disinformation has harnessed to the point, has harnessed and created a bubble of an alternate universe that 44% of this country will not believe a word that they can objectively count, things they can see with their own eyes, because they have been told by their tribal leader, Donald Trump, not to believe anything that they see or hear unless he says it. And that is marching orders. And now we have a political party which is melting down from this. And trust me, I used to be a Republican. I'm right up there with Colin Powell. I'm considered far left now, you know, because I stand for the Constitution and I stand for Americans, you know, values as it stood for 244 years. There is a faction of this country that believes burning it to the ground, and that fascism, as espoused by, you know, that soft fascism from Russia, is in fact the way America should be re-engineered. And if that means getting rid of democracy to do it, like throwing out the votes of 80 million people, which they think is going to happen tomorrow, well, they're more than willing to fight for it.
Well, Malcolm, we've come up to the close of our show here, and we're only halfway through our agenda, but we are the World Affairs Council, and to justify my my time on the air here, let's talk for maybe 5 minutes about the international terrorist threat. And we will invite you back to talk more about the big hack and get back into there's more questions here about QAnon and you know, you already have 50 people lined up to buy your book, and it's not even published yet. But let's just jump in a little bit. The international terrorist threat has not gone away. It's flourishing in some places, Western Africa, the Sahel, other parts of the Middle East. It's, you know, never-ending. ISIS is coming back. So give us the 5 minute. What should we know about international terrorism?
Well, you know, first off, international terrorism hasn't gone away. It's just reduced itself back down to small regional threats. The incidents occur almost every day, but due to the craziness we have in our own country, we don't hear about them anymore. There have been incidents that have occurred in France. There was a significant knifing of a French professor in Paris.
Beheading in a church, wasn't it?
Right. That's absolutely right. That is starting to spawn copycats around France. The French involvement in North Africa and the war against ISIS and Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is still viable in North Africa, in parts of Pakistan, and other parts of the Middle East, or Yemen. But the French just took their first losses of 2 soldiers in a bombing, which killed the first French female soldier. That occurred 3 days ago in Mali, by an IED that has been attributed, that has now been claimed by Al Qaeda. Interestingly enough, to show the internationalist flavor of the French force, this young woman was of French Vietnamese extraction. She was Vietnamese, French citizen, born in Paris, or born in France, serving in Mali in a United Nations role, and killed by an IED by, Arab jihadists. So, this threat has not gone away. We still have many missions that are occurring. The problem that we have now is that these withdrawals, which hopefully will stop in the next 2 weeks, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, support for operations in Somalia, which is interesting. I don't know if you know it, but the United States is abandoning Somalia. We've had some of our greatest counterterrorism successes there. They're great because you didn't hear about them, but they damaged Somali militant groups, including one plot, which we just exposed, where a Somali national had gone to the Philippines to learn to fly jets, right? Multi-engine airliners, claiming he was going to be flying for Somali Airlines. He was actually a member of the Al-Shabaab terrorist group, and his job was to learn how to get control of an aircraft, fly it to the United States, and crash it into a city. So that indictment just happened 3 weeks ago. So the world of international terrorism is still vibrant. It's still dynamic. They still want to do spectacular attacks. But again, it's been reduced down to small areas. ISIS in Eastern Afghanistan, Western Pakistan, ISIS in small parts of North Africa, and supporting other places. Egypt, ISIS is still rampant in Egypt, and they're reviving back in Syria because we're withdrawing all of our forces in Syria. So it will be very interesting, certainly once, if General Austin is confirmed as Secretary of Defense, you will see a more traditional hard line against international terrorists, not abandoning our allies' strategy. And, as I like to say, people out there in the right-wing extremist world call us internationalists and globalists, like it's a dirty word. We invented globalism when we landed on Normandy and Guadalcanal, right? We projected our national power and brought along with it the entirety of global trade for 70 years. So if you don't want to be supportive of a globalist, then you really don't need to buy anything from Walmart, because everything from there is from China, and everybody likes cheap stuff from Walmart.
Okay. Well, Malcolm, you have given us more than enough to consider as we look at the world in 2021. It's a challenging place overseas as much as ever, and we're now seeing the domestic environment heating up in ways that nobody could have ever have imagined. So thank you so much. I hope you'll accept our invitation to come back and talk with us some more. You have great friends here in Nashville, and I only regret that when you were here for Politicon back in 2019, we didn't get to go take you out for hot chicken and cold beer.
Well, we'll do that again in the future. I would love to come to Nashville. I have a personal reason to come to Nashville. And, I just, God bless all of you. I'm glad that you are all well. Certainly you, Pat, and your wife, and in good health. and you know, Nashville's strong. It'll bounce back.
Great. Malcolm, thanks so much. And thanks to our audience for joining us today. Again, the Tennessee World Affairs Council is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. You can visit tnwac.org to make a gift to keep us going, and also consider becoming a member. Malcolm, on behalf of the World Affairs Council, again, thanks, and have a blessed new year, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care, shipmate.